For today's main topic, we're going to be counting down the top 10 most popular hobbies here in America. Now, this is according to Statistica.com as of March 2023. And here's my goal in going through the top 10 most popular hobbies here in America for the 4th of July. I want to rank them on how frugal they are. Similar to bowling, I cannot look at any of these hobbies and say, oh, this one is clearly going to give the people who engage in this hobby more joy. I'm going to have to assume, for investigating the frugality here, that every hobby that you pursue has the same propensity to give equal happiness. Now, recall frugality, intentional practice of prudent economy. Well, the economy part is going to be maximizing your happiness per dollar. And if happiness is going to be the same across the board, I have to think about these things as which one is going to be possible with the least amount of investment. So I'm going to be looking at it in a way that might come across as, oh, you just don't want me to spend money on these things. But I think it's the only fair way that I can measure the potential level of frugality that can be exercised with a given hobby. Hobbies are something that we intentionally pursue, so I think we can ignore intentionality unless we run into something like gambling, where gambling becomes addictive and sort of overrides our higher brain function and gets us to engage with activity without really thinking about it. Hopefully gambling doesn't show up on the list. Unless I run into a situation like that, I think intentionality can be basically considered equal across all the top 10. And the same thing goes for practice. And that leaves us with prudence. So when it comes to prudence, it's avoiding our exposure to undue risk. So if I have two hobbies that I think have the same propensity for costing the person money, I'm probably going to rank the one which has less risk associated with it as being more frugal. So that's my methodology as we go here. I'm going to sort of be subjective as we run through the list beyond that, but that's how I'm thinking. If you would rank these differently, let me know in the comments. Let's start with the 10th most popular hobby in America. 23% of the participants in the Statista study said their favorite hobby was board games or card games. Well, board games and card games, let's think about this. There's not a lot of risk unless we're talking about Monopoly and friendships falling apart. But there's a wide range of investment that could be made here. You could probably try to seek out used games, but in my experience, anytime I've bought a used board game, it's missing pieces and just isn't as fun to play. Cards, on the other hand, can be relatively inexpensive compared to board games, and I've seen some pretty impressive board game collections. While we're talking about board games, my favorite board game growing up would be Stratego, and if I wanted to play with more than one other person, it was going to have to be Clue. I really did enjoy playing Clue. I have to recognize here that certain board games can get really pricey, but that has to be juxtaposed with the fact that cards are relatively inexpensive. I'm going to have to start by giving board games and cards a frugality rating of about 7 out of 10. Next, 24% of participants said that socializing was their favorite hobby. Now, socializing you can engage with pretty much for free. However, socializing results in peer pressure. We've all experienced peer pressure before, and peer pressure can lead to spending money, either due to hosting or being invited over for meals or going out for entertainment. That's not to say those are bad things, but you can feel more pressure to spend money and break your budget spontaneously when you're invited to something unexpected, or when you're out and about with friends and you spontaneously decide to engage with some form of entertainment. That's something that's a little harder to budget for than, say, buying a new board game. But I cannot ignore the fact that you can engage with socializing completely for free, especially if you're really good at saying no and maintaining your relationships. For that reason, I have to give socializing as a hobby an 8 out of 10 for frugality. Tied with socializing, 24% of participants said that gardening or houseplants are their favorite hobby. Now, gardening is going to probably end up costing, in the long run, more than a mild board game hobby, at least in my experience. I know plants can get relatively expensive. They don't necessarily have to be if you keep things small, but I know gardening begets more gardening. My wife recently started a garden in our backyard, and I tell you what, I'm excited. We have some amazing tomato plants out there, and nothing can beat a homegrown tomato. And I guess I got to take that into account. If gardening or plants that are producing food for you or your family are a part of this hobby, well, you're reaping a benefit that you probably can't with board games unless you do tournaments and win money doing them. I think, though, it's a lower risk endeavor with a higher reward, for engaging with gardening if you're looking at it from a utility perspective. So I'm going to have to rank this the same as socializing, 8 out of 10. On to number 7. 26% of participants said that their hobby of choice would be DIY arts and crafts. Arts and crafts have a near and dear place in my heart. I've seen some people take junk that they've picked up for free and turn it into gorgeous home decor with a little bit of creativity and ingenuity. Arts and crafts involves a problem solving that I can see the appeal for. And it also isn't something that you have to spend a lot of money on. You can go to craft stores, you can buy a lot of kits, you could really pour in a lot of money into this. However, the DIY side of things, if that's like DIY stuff around the house or making stuff that you could sell, well, there's a lot of opportunity to save money doing stuff yourself. And there's a lot of creativity that can be exercised where you can do arts and crafts for almost nothing. And that gets me excited. Out of my own bias, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 for frugality. On to number 6. 28% of participants said that travel was their hobby of choice. Now, I am not one to knock travel. When I was engaged to Amanda, we were engaged long distance. I was about 1,000 miles away as the crow flies, and I traveled to see her at least once a month. I think the month of September in the year we were engaged, I traveled 3 times that month, and I think all of those trips were flights. So while I see that there is an appeal for travel and there's a lot of utility involved with it, I know that it's expensive, especially with gas prices these days. A plane ticket or a car ride is always going to run you money. And when you're traveling, you could feel compelled to engage in activities that cost money if there's something that you can't find near home. I remember when I interned in Dallas, Texas, I really became victim to the food scene out there. Dallas, Texas has some awesome food. Shout out to the Pecan Lodge in particular. Man, that was good. Anyway, traveling is just expensive. I know you can do it on a budget. I know that, I do traveling all the time. It's something you can cut the cost down on, but it's always going to take investment to engage with. There's a reason why traveling is an aspiration for a lot of retired people. And when people are thinking about retirement and they want to travel, it really factors in to thinking about how big their nest egg needs to be. So I'm going to give travel a 5 out of 10 when it comes to frugality. I think that's fair. On to number 5. 31% of participants said that outdoor activities was their hobby of choice. Now, here we have something interesting. There are outdoor activities that cost money, but it is basically free to leave the house and go on a hike if you have hikes or walks or paths near your house. So I'm assuming here that you don't have to travel to engage with your outdoor activities. And if you don't, you can just leave the home and enjoy the beauty of nature surrounding you. I loved living in Utah. The mountains in and around the Salt Lake Valley, simply gorgeous. I didn't run out of waterfalls to see in the 4 years that I lived there. And I don't think it cost me anything other than a handful of sunburns. So outdoor activities gets a 9 out of 10 on the frugality level. I would give it a 10 out of 10, but not everybody lives in a wonderfully diverse outdoor activity area. On to number 4. 32% of participants said that video games was their hobby of choice. Video games, well, you could buy old consoles, you could buy used consoles, you could buy used games and engage with those. They're still going to cost you money. But I remember growing up that my favorite video game console was the Nintendo Wii, and you can pick one of those things up off of eBay for a song now. And those games hold up. The games that are on there, like Super Mario Galaxy or Wii Sports or Wii Play. I did do Wii Fit. That was a fun thing for exercise. Anymore these days, my favorite video game is actually going to be Beat Saber on the PlayStation 4 Pro or whatever VR that you have. Beat Saber is just absolutely the best application for VR when it comes to video games, hands down from my experience. And it's a workout. However, the setup that I have for VR costs nearly $1,000 if you don't count the TV. So video games have the propensity to be very expensive too, especially if you want the latest and greatest or you want good performance. If you want a PC that can game, you better be willing to put up at least $1,500, I'm pretty sure. Ask Linus Tech Tips about that one. I don't know what a good economy PC is with good game performance anymore with inflation. But just because we can say no to the newest, shiniest, brightest technology, I'm going to give video games a 7 out of 10. Oh, but there are also online games that are really popular, like Wordle or Nerdle, which is like Wordle, but a math version. And I kind of like Nerdle more than Wordle, but I do both. And it's something that both my wife's family and my parents really enjoy doing. And it's something that we text about every once in a while. I would give video games a 6 out of 10 if it weren't for the free video games and free game apps that exist out there. So we'll give video games 7 out of 10. Down to the top 3. 36% of participants said that owning pets, is their hobby of choice. Well, some pets are relatively inexpensive. I'm thinking a goldfish, but other pets can be very expensive. I'm thinking cats and dogs, or even an exotic bird. Vets are expensive. Food is expensive. The larger the pet, the more that the pet eats. And if I dive too much into the different costs or expenses or ways to cut costs on pets, I think I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble with a lot of listeners. So I'm just going to give this a 7 out of 10 and move on without thinking about it too much more. Let's move on to number 2. 36% of participants said that reading was their hobby of choice. Now, I have a very strong bias when it comes to reading because this year it was a New Year's resolution for me to read every morning with my second cup of coffee. And I'm proud to tell you, I think I'm on my 4th book now for the year. And I love reading. It's a great way to grow your knowledge. And it's a great way to reduce your exposure to undue risk by filling your head with knowledge that you may not otherwise have had before if you read educational material or nonfiction books that help you grow as a person. And the thing is, reading is free. There's plenty of reading to do on the internet, but if you like books, if you want a paper book that smells dusty, you can go to the library, and the library in a library card completely free. You don't have to ever buy books in order to engage with reading and growing yourself as a person or growing in knowledge. And because of that, I'm going to give reading the perfect 10 out of 10. Not because it's my hobby that I'm focusing on this year, but because I think that reading is the perfectly frugal hobby. Moving on to the number 1 answer. 39% of participants said that cooking or baking is their hobby of choice. And I also have a bias towards cooking and baking because, well, when I was younger, and this is going to have to be a story for the podcast at another time, when I was about 14, I taught myself how to cook. It was a combination of seeing my mom cooking growing up to that point and also watching Emeril Lagasse and Elton Brown on the Food Network. I really loved cooking, and I loved baking more than cooking early on. I wanted to write myself the perfect apple pie recipe. Talk about America. Talk about the 4th of July. Nothing more American than apple pie, am I right? So I wanted to make apple pie recipes of my own so I could enter into pie bake-offs. I think I ended up winning 3 or 4 growing up. And it was with a recipe that I wrote from the ground up. I was able to combine the buttery, rich flavors of Italian and French pastries and the beautiful structure of an American pie crust and make a pie crust from scratch that is in a league all of its own. It's incredible. And I tell you what, if you want to make any good pie, any good fruit pie, you take a half cup of cream, a cup of sugar, and then the fruit that you want with any spices, and you put that together, and that makes an excellent filling. Oh, I almost forgot. You got to throw in some sort of thickener like cornstarch or tapioca pearls. But don't use tapioca pearls if you're doing a lattice top because then they get nasty and crunchy. And anyway, I'm talking too much about baking. I love baking. And baking and cooking is a way that you can provide for you and your family in a less expensive way than eating out all the time. So ultimately, cooking and baking is like the epitome of exploring a frugal hobby. It costs money. There's no way around it. You're not going to engage with cooking and baking without spending money. So I can't give it a perfect score. But due to my obvious bias and excitement and foreshadowing of future stories, and the fact that food is what binds all of us as humans together in experience, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Cooking and baking, the most popular hobby in America, gets a 9 out of 10. Second only to reading. Do you agree with my rankings? Would you order them any differently than this? Let me know in the comments below. And until next week, until the next episode of the HopeFilled Financial Podcast, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.